There are times when everything seems meaningless. I myself have gone through moments where I asked, Lord, what is the purpose of so much suffering? And it was precisely this firmness in knowing that it was in the Lord that I should cling to discover the reason for my trials that helped me overcome my challenges. And if today you are going through your challenging days and God is the only thing you have left, this video didn't find you by chance. There's something almost radical about a woman who refuses to fall apart while she waits, a woman who has handed her deepest longing to God and somehow, against all cultural logic, come out on the other side more whole, more grounded, and more at peace than the people around her who stopped waiting and settled. If you found your way to this message today, it wasn't by accident. Something deeper than curiosity led you here, and it's worth paying attention to that. Maybe you've been sitting in a season that feels too long, too quiet, and too misunderstood by everyone who keeps offering advice you didn't ask for. Maybe you've opened your Bible so many times looking for reassurance that the pages fall open on their own. Maybe you've wondered, in your most honest and unguarded moments, whether God actually remembers the specific prayer you've been praying about love and marriage and the man you believe He has for you. Here's what most people will never tell you, and what this message is going to show you from beginning to end. A woman who has only God isn't a woman who has nothing. She's actually the woman who has everything she needs to receive the kind of love most people only dream about. This isn't a message about settling for singleness or dressing up loneliness with spiritual language. This is about what genuinely happens in the heart, in the spirit, in the soul, when a woman chosen by God stops running from the waiting and starts letting it transform her. Something brought you to these words today, and before this is over, you just might find the answer your heart has been searching for longer than you'd like to admit. There's a season in a woman's life that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and honestly, it's one of the most spiritually significant chapters she'll ever walk through. It's that quiet in-between place where she's not heartbroken exactly, but she's not where she hoped she'd be either. She's still waiting, still trusting, still showing up to church on Sunday, still reading her Bible at night, still whispering the same prayer she's been whispering for longer than she'd like to admit. From the outside, her life might look completely fine, maybe even beautiful. But on the inside, there's this low hum of longing that never quite goes away. It's the kind of ache that sneaks up on her at weddings, or on a quiet Friday night when the apartment feels just a little too still. She's not bitter about it, not really, but she's tired. And that's okay to say out loud. What makes this season so hard is that the world doesn't have much patience for a woman who's waiting with faith. People start asking questions she didn't ask for. Have you tried dating apps? Or maybe you're being too picky, as if her deepest longing is some kind of problem to be solved with better strategy. But here's what those well-meaning voices miss entirely. Her waiting isn't a flaw in her character. It's a reflection of her conviction. She's not just looking for someone to fill a seat at the dinner table. She's believing God for a man chosen specifically for her, someone whose values, faith, and vision align with everything she's been building in her own life. That kind of marriage doesn't happen by accident, and deep down, she knows that. Her spirituality isn't holding her back from love, it's actually the very thing refining her for it. The Bible is full of women who understood this kind of waiting, even when it cost them something. And what's remarkable about each of their stories is that God never once forgot about them in the in-between. That quiet season, the one that feels so uneventful from the outside, was actually where the most important inner work was taking place. It's where character gets built. It's where faith stops being a concept and starts becoming a lifeline. She may not be able to see what God is doing right now, and that's genuinely difficult. But this season of waiting, as heavy as it feels some days, is not a sign that she's been overlooked. It's actually evidence that God is being intentional. And intentional love, the kind worth waiting for, always takes time to prepare. There's something quietly remarkable happening in a woman who chooses to lean into God during a season of waiting rather than away from Him. Most people only see the surface, the single woman, the empty chair, the unanswered prayer, but they completely miss the transformation that's taking place underneath. While she's going about her days, trusting, praying, and doing her best to stay anchored, God is doing something deeply intentional inside of her. He's not ignoring her longing. He's not dismissing her desire for marriage as something trivial or unspiritual. He sees it. He honors it. And in the most tender, patient way imaginable, He's using this very season to shape her into the woman who will be ready, truly ready, when that chosen man finally arrives in her life. One of the most powerful things God does during this time is strengthen her sense of identity. A woman who grounds herself in her spirituality during the waiting season stops defining her worth by her relationship status. And that shift is absolutely enormous. She starts reading her Bible not just for comfort, but for clarity about who she is, what she deserves, and what kind of love she refuses to settle for. She begins to recognize her own patterns, heal old wounds she didn't even realize were still bleeding, and develop a kind of emotional and spiritual depth that simply cannot be rushed. God is essentially building her from the inside out, reinforcing the very foundation that a real, lasting marriage will one day rest upon. That's not wasted time, that's sacred preparation. And then there's the matter of her faith itself, which gets tested and stretched in ways that nothing else could quite replicate. Waiting on God for something as personal and important as a life partner requires a level of trust that goes far beyond Sunday morning belief. It requires her to wake up on a Wednesday when everything feels ordinary and distant, and still choose to believe that God's plan for her is good. The Bible calls this kind of faith a shield, and she's learning to carry it with both hands. Every day she chooses trust over panic. She's developing a spiritual resilience that will serve not just her future marriage, but every area of her life. God isn't just preparing her for a relationship. He's preparing her for a life lived with unshakable confidence in who He is, and that changes absolutely everything. One of the most damaging things a woman in this season can do is open the door to lies that sound almost reasonable. They don't show up loudly or dramatically, they creep in slowly, dressed up as logic or self-awareness, and before she knows it, they've taken up permanent residence in the back of her mind. Lies like, maybe I'm just not the type of woman men commit to, or perhaps I waited too long, and now the window has closed. These thoughts feel convincing because they arrive during her most vulnerable moments late at night, after another disappointing experience, or when it seems like everyone around her is moving forward while she's standing still. But here's the truth, that her spirituality must keep speaking louder than those whispers. A lie repeated often enough starts to feel like a fact, and she cannot afford to let that happen. The most dangerous lie of all is the one that suggests God has forgotten about her specifically. That somehow, in the middle of orchestrating the entire universe, He misplaced her prayer about marriage. She's read enough of her Bible to know that's not who God is, and yet, in the middle of a long and quiet season, even the most faith-filled woman can start to wonder. This is exactly where the enemy loves to plant seeds of doubt. Because a woman who stops trusting God's timing becomes a woman who starts making desperate decisions. She might rush into a relationship that doesn't honor her values. She might shrink herself to seem more appealing to someone who was never chosen for her in the first place. The lies, if she lets them, will always push her toward less than what God actually has in mind. What she needs And what the Bible consistently offers her is a ruthless commitment to replacing every lie with truth. Not toxic positivity, not empty affirmations, but genuine, grounded, scripture-backed truth that she comes back to again and again. Truth like the fact that God's plans for her include a future and a hope. Truth like the reality that being chosen by God first is the very thing that makes her ready to be chosen by the right man. Her spirituality is meant to function like a filter, letting the truth in and keeping the lies out. Every time she picks up her Bible, instead of scrolling through comparison traps, every time she prays instead of panicking, she's actively fighting for her own mind. And that fight, as exhausting as it sometimes feels, is one of the most important battles she will ever win. There's a difference between saying God is enough and actually living like it's true, and most honest women in this season will tell you that the gap between those two things can feel enormous. It's easy to say the right words at church or in a Bible study, to nod along when someone quotes a verse about contentment, and then go home to a quiet house and feel the full weight of the longing all over again. That tension doesn't make her a bad Christian, it makes her human. And God, who created her with the capacity for deep relational love, understands that tension better than anyone. He's not disappointed in her for wanting marriage. He put that desire in her. But there's a moment, a real specific life-changing moment, when something shifts inside a woman who keeps showing up to God honestly. And she begins to experience Him not just as her Savior, but as her sustainer. That shift doesn't usually happen all at once. It's more like a slow sunrise than a light switch. She starts noticing that her prayers sound different, less frantic, more intimate. She realizes she's spending time in her Bible not just searching for promises about marriage, but genuinely enjoying the presence of the God she's reading about. Her spirituality stops feeling like a waiting room and starts feeling like a home. She begins to find a kind of joy that doesn't evaporate when circumstances don't change, because it's no longer dependent on circumstances at all. This is what the Apostle Paul described when he talked about a peace that goes beyond human understanding. It doesn't make logical sense given what she's still waiting for. But it's undeniably real, and it becomes the most solid ground she's ever stood on. Here's what's so beautifully counterintuitive about this place. A woman who has genuinely found sufficiency in God doesn't become someone who stops wanting love, she becomes someone who stops needing it to survive. And that distinction is everything. It means she can enter a relationship from a place of wholeness rather than hunger. It means she won't accept less than she deserves just to fill a void, because the void has already been filled. The man chosen for her will one day walk into a life that's already rich, already purposeful, already deeply rooted in faith. He won't be her rescue, he'll be her partner. And the kind of marriage that's built between two whole people who both know God as enough is the kind that actually lasts. She's not just waiting for a husband anymore. She's building a life worth sharing. One of the most faith-stretching things about trusting God with something as personal as marriage is that His process rarely looks the way she imagined it would. She had a timeline in her head most women do. And when that timeline quietly passed, without the outcome she hoped for, it would have been easy to assume the story was over. But God has never once been bound by a woman's timeline, and the Bible is packed with stories that prove it. Sarah laughed when she heard the promise because it seemed so impossibly late. Ruth couldn't have predicted that a simple act of loyalty would lead her directly to the man chosen to change her entire future. These weren't women with perfect faith, they were women with persistent faith. And there's a significant difference. Persistence means she keeps going even when the signs feel faint. And the signs are there, even when they're subtle. God is still writing her story every single time she chooses integrity over compromise. Every time she walks away from something that looked good on the surface but felt wrong in her spirit, that's God's hand guiding her away from a detour. Every time her spirituality deepens during this season rather than withers, that's evidence of divine investment in her life. Every meaningful friendship, every healed wound, every moment of unexpected joy in an ordinary Tuesday, these are all brushstrokes. She might not be able to see the full painting yet, and that's genuinely hard. But the absence of the final reveal doesn't mean the artist has stopped working. It means the work isn't finished. And unfinished doesn't mean abandoned, it means in progress. What the Bible keeps returning to, in story after story, is the idea that God's timing is never accidental and never cruel, even when it feels like both. There's a purpose being woven through every single day of her waiting that she simply cannot see from where she's standing right now. The man she's praying for may be in his own season of preparation, being shaped and refined by God just as intentionally as she is. Their paths haven't crossed yet, not because God forgot, but because God is precise. He doesn't do rushed introductions between two people he's been carefully preparing. When the time is right, truly right, not just convenient, the story he's been writing will start to make sense in a way that takes her breath away. Until then, every day of faithful waiting is another sentence in a story that's far from over. There's a particular kind of courage that doesn't get nearly enough credit, the courage to keep walking forward in faith when the road ahead still looks uncertain. It's not the dramatic, movie-worthy kind of bravery that everyone applauds. It's the quiet, daily decision to get up, show up, and refuse to let hope die, even when nothing has visibly changed. For a woman who's been trusting God with her desire for marriage through a long and sometimes lonely season, this kind of courage is something she exercises almost every single day. She doesn't always feel it. Some mornings it takes everything she has just to pray the same prayer one more time. But she does it anyway, and that faithfulness, as ordinary as it looks from the outside, is one of the most powerful spiritual acts a person can perform. Walking forward doesn't mean pretending the waiting doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean plastering on a smile at every bridal shower and acting like her heart isn't quietly carrying something heavy. God never asked her to perform contentment. He invited her into a genuine, honest relationship where she can bring the full weight of her longing without shame. The Bible never celebrates emotional suppression. It celebrates the kind of raw, real faith that cries out honestly and then chooses to trust anyway. David did it in the Psalms. Hannah did it in the temple. These were people who took their pain directly to God without dressing it up. And every single time, God met them right there. She is allowed to feel everything she feels and still believe everything she believes. Those two things are not in conflict. What carries her forward, ultimately, is not willpower or positive thinking or even the encouragement of people around her. What carries her forward is a spirituality that has been tested enough times to know that God has never once failed to show up. Her faith in His goodness isn't naive, it's earned. It's been built prayer by prayer, Bible verse by Bible verse, through every season He brought her through before this one. And as she keeps walking, not perfectly, not without doubt, but consistently, she's moving towards something real. The marriage she's praying for, the man chosen specifically for her, the life she's dared to believe is possible, none of it is out of reach. God doesn't plant desires in a woman's heart just to watch them wither. He plants them because He fully intends to bring them to life. In His way, in His time, and with a beauty that surpasses everything she could have planned for herself.